Welcome to another episode of Mindcast, where we explore the depths of science, health, wellness, and current events and philosophy. Today, I'm thrilled to be speaking with Lael Stone. Lael is an author, educator, TEDx speaker, and who's also the co-founder of Woodline Primary School, founded in 2021, which is based on connectedness and emotional social well-being. And we're definitely going to be talking a little bit more about that later on in the show. She's a sought-out speaker who speaks a lot about trauma, parental connectedness, resiliency, and I'm very looking forward to having the conversation today. And thank you so much. So welcome, Lael.
Thank you, George. It's lovely to be here.
Okay, so I would like to start off by, I read a quote on your website. And that quote says, I speak for the heart of the child, which I think succinctly summarizes what it is that you do. So I want to ask, what exactly is it that you do, and how did you find yourself going down this career path?
Well, I do many things, and I think my journey, to doing what I do now has probably been 20 years in the making. And a lot of it's actually got to do with my own children and watching their development, and also wanting to be as aware as possible as a parent. So many, many years ago, I actually started working in childbirth after I'd had a tricky first birth experience. Then I went on to have a really empowering, wonderful second birth experience. And that actually piqued something in me that made me go, I want other people to have really powerful experiences. It makes a massive difference when we can start the beginning of the journey in a really healthy way. You know, when you become a parent and you've been through a traumatic birth experience, it's hard. It's really, really hard. So what happens if we, can really work to help people have positive experiences no matter what happens? Then they're going to be on the right foot for parenting. So it kind of started there through my own journeys and working in birth for a long time. I began to see the trauma that was present for people, particularly, how they process these big birth experiences and the impact it has. So that kind of got me on that path there. And then as my kids started to grow, it moved more into parenting, and how do I parent my kids as consciously as possible? I knew that I didn't want to punish and shame them, but I also didn't know what to do when they got really upset or had big feelings. I was a bit lost in myself. And as, my work speaks to a lot these days, we often default to what was done to us. So before we even realize that we're parenting the way that we were parented, even if that doesn't necessarily feel good. So I think that sent me on a bit of a quest of really research and learning about understanding parenting more, understanding about trauma, emotions, feelings, and how could I raise my children to be really emotionally healthy humans. That was a bit of my strong guiding motivation. And from there, then as my kids grew, and my oldest, my son, he started to move into puberty. And then that also piqued my interest of like, well, how do I help him to be a really sexually capable, aware young man, who understands consent and boundaries. And that also made me go, gosh, am I teaching him enough? And then what else is everybody learning here? And then that kind of lent me into doing more study and research. And I ended up then teaching sex ed to teenagers for about 5 years in secondary schools, which was one of the most fun jobs. I know that people think that's their idea of absolute hell, being talking to teenagers about sex. But man, I learned a lot from that. And I loved working with teenagers. And, it made me see the huge gaps that we have around information and pleasure and, safety and all these kind of things that aren't talked about. And then so I did that for a while. And then again, as my kids grew more, an opportunity came up to create a school. One of my clients approached me and said, our schooling system feels really broken, and one of her children was starting school, and, why isn't there a schooling system that really speaks to everything that you've taught me about parenting? And I was like, well, I don't know that it exists. And then she said, why don't we build it together? And so she had the finances to do it, and pretty much said, let's create something that is different to what's out there, and that really supports the whole child emotionally, physically, mentally, as well as academically. So that was a huge undertaking that took nearly 3 years of my life to bring that school to life. It's not easy to build a school, particularly here in Australia. So it's a really hard thing to do. And really, I think you need just the right bits of magic to bring it to life. And so our school's been open now. We're in our 4th year, which is really amazing. And it's been incredibly powerful to watch these ideas and visions come to life, and the impact it has, really being a trauma-informed school and helping children stay connected to nature and all sorts of stuff. So that's been incredibly rich, bringing that to life. And then from, building that school, it's kind of rolled on to other things. But I find that probably the long answer to your question is really following life has really guided me to do this kind of work. Particularly as a parent, I really wanted to be as aware as possible in raising my children, and that's influenced a lot of my work. And then just working with people and families for 20 years, I've just seen, I think, the need for more understanding, for more compassion, and the overarching thing amongst all the work I've done is being able to tune into ourselves as adults and heal the younger parts of us and understand our imprints and stories, so that the way that we turn up for everybody else in the world is coming from the most anchored place that we have within.
A couple of things to unpack there. First off, what do you mean by big birth trauma?
So I think birth trauma happens for a lot of, and I'll say not just women, but for partners as well. Birth is one of the biggest things that we do as a woman, particularly, right? And our current systems, and I'd say this all around the world, often have moved into highly interventionist practices, and it's really all about, the goal is to have a live mum and a live baby. Now, that's a very good goal, right? We want everybody to be okay, but often the emotional elements of the mother aren't taken into consideration. So a lot of the time, sometimes women are coerced into things they don't want. There is a lot of fear connected to birth. Women often don't get the support that they need. Sometimes they don't have access to drugs when they want drugs. Sometimes they're given drugs when they don't want drugs. Birth, I think, because we have become so disconnected from our bodies, but also because we no longer live in those tribes and communities. Women aren't exposed to birth and the normalcy of birth, because birth is actually an incredibly powerful, normal thing that our bodies are designed to do. But often the more that we get in the way, or the more sometimes we bring interventions in the way, the more it takes a bit of a detour. Now, that can have a huge impact on women. And not all women have birth trauma, but here in Australia, we have 1 in 3 women suffer from birth trauma. And that's a huge thing, because birth trauma can be so impactful on creating anxiety, depression, fear. It can create PTSD. It can create massive divides in relationships. It can have an ongoing impact with how they feel about their baby, about their body. Like, it's a huge, huge problem that we're not really addressing. And I think, again, it's in our current culture, it's often not spoken about. It's like, if your baby's fine and you're fine, then we're okay, let's just move on. But actually, a lot of the time, women aren't fine, but we're just taught to bury it. And then that can have, other impacts that happen. So, I often come back right to the very beginning and think it starts right from the very beginning. When we first become parents, how do we make that transition into parenthood supported? How do we make it gentle? How do we help them feel heard and get them to trust their intuition about what they know their child or baby needs? There's a lot to it. We know that if we can help people have a smooth transition into parenthood, then it's going to set them up for a much better journey in front of them.
So what kind of advice perhaps would you give a pregnant woman, 2 months, 3 months? I know here in Toronto, I'm not sure how it is in Australia, but we have doulas where they would support, the mother throughout pregnancy and even thereafter, which I think it's super important. I think everyone would benefit, right? But unfortunately, like you said, pregnancy has been highly institutionalized. There's a lot of intervention. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it isn't. And for women going through a first pregnancy, I mean, of course, I cannot speak from experience, but I can't even imagine the potential or the possibility for trauma and the implications that would have, indefinitely throughout their life. So what advice would you give to someone who's just getting pregnant, just got pregnant, has no idea what's going on in their body, what kind of support they can get? What would you say to them?
Yeah. So I worked as a doula for a very long time. So I am a very big fan of doulas, because I think every woman should have a doula, someone to be their guide. We often talk about birth is like climbing Everest, right? And, you wouldn't do it on your own. You'd get a guide to show you, and birth can often be like that. I think the first, for me, there's 3 things that I have found over these years of working in birth that impact having a positive birth experience. And the first one is education, without doubt. So it's really getting informed around what birth is. Now, for a lot of people in our modern day, we believe what birth is what we see on television. So every time we see something on TV or in a movies about birth, it's usually high drama. There's something bad's about to happen. Someone's going to die. There's a high risk. We need somebody to save us. That is usually what standard birth is portrayed in the media. And we watch that from when we're really little, and we go, oh, that's birth. Birth looks terrifying and scary. And gosh, thank God someone's there to save us. Whereas actually birth is a pretty normal human process. And our bodies are designed to do it. I used to say to women, if your body knows how to make a baby, on some level it knows how to birth a baby. But often, and I do absolutely know that there are complications and things that can happen, but our percentage of high risk women actually isn't that much, right? Again, it differs depending in countries and stuff like that. But, even here in Australia, I think it's around about, 75 to 80% of women are considered low risk, which means that their bodies are, fine to birth a baby. So the first thing I think is education, is actually reading books, listening to podcasts, watching good positive birth stuff, like really learning about the mechanics of how your body's meant to work. Your body has these beautiful hormones that are meant to help you birth your baby. And, lots of stuff goes around helping that experience, which can be around your environment, who's with you, all those kind of things. So education is really, really powerful. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is really choose your care providers wisely. So it's really thinking about, what kind of birth do I want? Now, if you want to just have an elective cesarean, then yes, a private obstetrician, or, it could be a very good choice, because obstetricians are the specialists in high risk birth. That's what their expertise is in. Whereas if you want to have a natural water birth and you're going to a hospital or an organization that, has a really high cesarean rate, or is, your care is given by an obstetrician, maybe that's not the right fit for what you want. Maybe midwifery care is better for you. So I think choosing your care provider is really important. Are they aligned, or do they speak to what it is that you think that you want? If you really want a natural birth without drugs, yet your care provider is like, oh, no, all my women have epidurals, then that may not be a good fit, right? So it might be about finding someone that feels aligned with you. So choosing your care provider wisely is really important. And then the third thing I would say is 100% about support. It is about making sure you have the right support with you, who is going to be able to support you or hold you in what you want and desire. Now, which is beautiful these days, we often want to have our partners at our birth, which is amazing, right? And beautiful for bonding, for babies, for our relationship. But again, often a lot of partners come into birth, without any education. They're not informed. The first sign of things being hard as far as pain, which is a normal part of birth, they freak out. We might need to have the drugs. You want to make sure your partner's on board as well with what you're wanting, but also having a guide like a doula or a midwife with you, who you've formed a relationship with, makes a massive difference. And a lot of the research speaks to continuity of care, which is about having someone who's journeyed with you through your whole pregnancy, is there for the birth and there postnatally, often gives the best outcomes, because we have that support, we have that trust, we have that understanding of each other. So they're the kind of three things that I say make a massive difference in taking steps towards having a positive birth experience. Now, there's no guarantees in birth, right? At the end of the day, I often say the baby's going to choose on some level how it wants to come out. We can do all the right things, and then somehow these cheeky babies are like, nah, this is what's going to happen. But when we can put these things in place, and particularly when we are informed and we're making informed decisions, then usually we feel better about the birth experience, because we're not kind of being blindsided by the system, or we're not feeling out of control because we don't know what happens. We can actually then make informed choices within it, and that makes a massive difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would completely agree with pretty much everything you said. You said it very, very eloquently and articulately, and I would agree having a doula on board and just a multitude of healthcare practitioners support is very important, and not only with your journey postnatally, but throughout the entire process. I do want to shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
And I know you gave a TED talk. I don't remember when it was. I did watch it, and you kind of spoke about three emotions, or the three ways that children deal with emotions. I think it was expression.
Mhm.
Um,
Repression
sorry.
and repression, expression, and aggression.
Yes, and aggression. Yeah. So those three, and I would highly encourage everyone to watch the video. I think it's about a 13 or 14 minute video clip, and you kind of dive a little bit deeper into what that means. But I want to shift our attention to something more commonly known as like intelligent quotient versus an emotional quotient, right?
Mhm.
And I think these are both very important. Now, typically, I guess in our society, where we put such a heavy weight on, the intelligent quotient, especially if we look at our educational system, right? Our success is simply measured by grades and by a numerical value, or an alphabetical value, and that's what we attribute our success to. And the emotional, aspect of it is pretty much void, right? And so I would like to ask you and explore this conversation. Do you think that, or rather, I would like to hear your thoughts. Which one is more important to develop first? Are they good to develop, in a simultaneous fashion, and we can have fun with this? Or would you say I would rather, develop the EQ first and then the IQ, or vice versa? I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's a good question. And look, for me, I would say the EQ, when we can set that up, then the IQ comes from that. So, what I guess I've learned over the years of working with families and children is that when children don't feel safe in their bodies, so when they feel under threat, when there is potential ruptures with their caregivers, when they're in environments that feel really full on for them, then their brain isn't open to learning. It isn't open to taking in information. It isn't open to critical thinking, thinking outside the box, questioning, all that kind of stuff. The brain's doing a really big job of just like, hey, we got to survive here. We got to stay safe, right? Now that can happen a lot in family environments as well, when we have, well-meaning parents who love their children but have got their own kind of traumas and hurts on board, and maybe they yell a lot or they shame their kids a lot. And so the child is spending a lot of their time just on high alert going, am I okay? Is it safe to be me here? So that doesn't lend itself to learning and growing. So one of the most important things I think first is we've got to come back to, how do we help children feel safe? How do we help them understand their bodies and their minds? How do we help them understand and process their feelings and emotions, so that when they are in situations that are stressful, when they are in places that feel tricky, they can be like, I don't feel safe here, or I need to go and move my body for a few minutes, or I've got some anger here and I need to move it, or they have the ability to identify how they're feeling so that they can find their way back into balance. Now, I always talk about that children are what I call either in balance or out of balance. When a child is in balance, because they're usually chatty and they're laughing, they like make eye contact, they want to share about what's going on, they're usually calm in their bodies, they're usually gentle, they're kind to the dog or their sibling. You can tell when they're in balance because they're feeling good in their bodies. When kids are out of balance, it's when we see them hitting the dog, or when they're, yelling, you're the worst dad in the world, or when they don't want to cooperate, or when they don't want to do their learning. There's something going on in that beautiful nervous system in their body that's going, this is too much for me here. And our natural inbuilt mechanism is to find our way back into balance. And sometimes children do this through crying and raging. Sometimes they do it through moving their bodies in big ways. Sometimes they do it through laughing. Sometimes they do it through play. And our job as adults is to be able to look back and be able to tune in and go, oof, I can see my child's out of balance here. How do I help them come back into balance? By providing that safety and that connection there for them to do it. So when we come back to your original question, which is really about what's more important, where are we at? For me personally, and this is just my opinion, and I've got no science to back this up, so I'm just going to say from my 20 years of working in this field, when we can work on the emotional intelligence first, when a child feels connected, when they understand their feelings, their body, when they're attuned to their body, when they're in their bodies, when they're connected to what's going on, then when they have got that balance there, then learning comes next, and that's when learning can be infinite because they're open to all of that there. So for me, I really do think that when we can work on the emotional stuff first, which really is those first 5 to 7 years of a child being at home with a parent, hopefully in a calm, safe environment, they are learning all this stuff by experiencing these big feelings and emotions and being met with compassion and kindness so that they can learn to work through them, they be able to identify them, and then they're more connected to themselves so they can then go and learn from there.
Um, I would agree with you again, but I definitely want to explore the other perspective. So I would agree in that. I think the emotional aspect of things is very important, and it's a lot of the work that I do is exploring childhood trauma and opening up, and even with myself. But let's say for the in a hypothetical scenario, the emotional intelligence or attunement was void. The parents were absent for whatever reason. They were working to raise their family. The child went to school, was very withdrawn, not connected socially, but they were a stellar student. They were doing very well in school. They excelled. What does that look like again, in your opinion, as they transition to adolescence and then into adulthood, and then perhaps into a career that they thrive in? What would that kind of path look like?
Yeah. And look, that's a beautiful thing that you bring up. That is a reality for some people, because sometimes what we do as humans is we learn to adapt for safety. Well, we're always looking for safety. So if you grew up in an environment where there wasn't that attunement, or perhaps the other side, which was you were only loved when you were really good, when you are successful and you're succeeding, that's the measure of love. So you throw yourself into being very good academically or achieving at sports or whatever, because the baseline is I'm only good enough when I do this. Or in the scenario that you explained, perhaps it is the child is like, I'm not going to get my needs met there, so let's go over here. Let's almost hide in learning and academia and all those kind of things so that I feel like I am enough. Like that can be a thing. It's at the end of the day, I think we come back to this, and I find this with a lot of the adults I work with. One of our deepest wounds and fears is that we're not enough. And so from a very young child, we often begin by gauging, well, where do I feel enough? Well, I feel enough if I'm a good boy or a good girl and mum and dad approve of me. Or when I get accolades for being smart, gosh, that makes me feel like I'm enough, so I'm going to keep doing that. Or I'm really good at playing basketball and everyone thinks I'm awesome, so I better be keeping on doing that. Because we often, when we don't have that inner, I think, connection and knowing that you're enough just the way you are, we're often going to look outside of ourselves to build ourselves up to go, I am okay because of this. Now, our world 100% supports that. Our world at this day and age, as you brought up beautifully before, goes, when you get good grades, you're enough. When you get into a good college, university, you're enough. When you get a high-paying job, you're enough. When you've got the fast car, you're enough. When you've got the big house, you're enough. All these external validations that say you tick the box for us in society. Now, you could have all those things, but you could be deeply lonely, or you could be really challenged in relationships. Intimacy could be terrifying for you, or you might not be able to identify how you actually feel, so you numb it a lot and you drink a lot of alcohol, or you smoke a lot of dope, or you work so much so you don't have to feel. Success is different for everybody. I mean, this day and age, I feel like the measure of success is a very calm nervous system. Like, to me, I'm like, that's the gold, right? It used to be like money. It used to be power. It used to be all those things, which our world still absolutely, validates and acknowledges. But we can often see a lot of unhealthy people who have achieved, but actually are not living a balanced, healthy life, right? Because it's all about that external stuff. So I think, at the end of the day, humans are so fabulously complex, right? And I always come back to this, is that we are all doing the best job we know how. We are all trying to keep ourselves safe emotionally. And we are always coming from protection with most of the stuff that we do. And often that is deeply unconscious. We're not even aware that we're doing it. So there's nothing wrong with achieving, and there's nothing wrong with being super smart. And all of that is brilliant. But we often want to come back to, where is the balance in this? And do I feel enough for myself? Or am I only identified by what I do, what I look like, what I achieve, all those kind of things? Because usually that will crumble at some point. We're going to get older and you can no longer depend on your looks, or you might, lose the money, and then you're like, oh God, well, who am I now? Or, life has a way of kind of helping us come back home to our truth, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting because and I'm not a parent, so I can't speak to that experience, but um, raising emotionally intelligent children is not possible unless you have an emotionally intelligent adult, right? And so it's a lot of the times, as you know, I guess when I speak to parents and patients, as we go down through childhood, if I would ask the question, be the parent that you needed it in childhood, right? And first, to be able to first and foremost answer that question is you need to have probably done some work and went back to childhood and understood what kind of trauma did I experience, understand your attachment style, and understand that your parents are not to blame because they did the best that they could with the resources that they had. And I think that's a very, very important point to
Yeah.
distinguish, right? Because it's to blame your parents, I don't think is the right thing to do, and it's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah.
But I would ask you, what are some tools that parents can utilize in order to raise emotionally intelligent children?
I love that you bring this up, Josh, because you're right. It's so important. We can't do this unless we're doing our own inner work. And I often find, parents would come to me and say, "Can I bring my 6-year-old to you? They're out of control." And I actually never saw children. I worked in parenting, but I only ever saw the parents. And I was like, no, how about we just have a chat first, right? Because children are often responding to their environment, and children have this magnificent way of coming in and saying, "Hey, mom, hey, dad, you've got this whole wound thing here going on around this topic. So I'm just going to react or respond in this way to really push your buttons to make you look at it," right? Our kids are our best teachers. And I can't tell you the amount of times I've experienced this personally, but also with clients, where when an adult has kind of got the bigger picture of what it's about for them, then the child's behavior completely changes because the child's just responding to the environment and what's being put out there. So I think the first thing that you're saying, which is really so vital, is the parenting is about doing our own work. If you want to be a great parent, you've got to look at your own story, and we have to understand our past so we can actually change our future. Now, that can be as simple as, thinking about, okay, when I was a little kid, when, I did something wrong or when I got upset, how did my parents respond? Did they smack me? Did they send me to my room? Did they ignore me? Did they come up close and sit down and say, "I hear you, let out all your feelings"? Like, what was the imprint there? And from there, we can actually start to go, well, I was just shut down or shamed. And so what happened then? Well, I learned the feelings weren't okay. So then when my 3-year-old's having a meltdown because I won't let him, brush the dog with a toothbrush, right? And I start to get really, really angry, right? And I'm having a reaction, then maybe there's something in there for me, which is really about, well, I never actually got to have big feelings and express how I felt. And that feels a wounding within us. And so then we get angry and we try and shut down whatever's happening in front of us. So often in parenting, one of the best places to start is to be constantly curious about our reactions. What annoys you? What triggers you? What gets you activated? Now, sometimes we get really fired up as parents just purely because we're tired or we need to eat or we haven't got our needs met, and we have to meet our own needs first. And then once we do, then usually, hopefully we can be that calm, patient parent. But if you are yelling a lot or you are finding that the same thing really is firing you up, then there's an invitation to go, what is here for me around this? And I think those first steps of curiosity, wow, I'm getting really angry because my child won't get in the car. Okay, there's something here for me. What's going on? And then I often say to parents, ask yourself the question, does this remind me of anything? Like, do I know this feeling from somewhere? And maybe it's like, yeah, it reminds me of my younger brother who never listened when my parents wanted to do something, and then they'd scream and yell, and then I'd get in trouble, and it just used to frustrate me. And you're like, oh, okay, so there's something here from when you were younger around your child, your brother not doing what you wanted to do. And from there, we can kind of take those steps and look further into what is here for me, like what is coming up. And sometimes we need to take that to a therapist, so we have someone to talk to about it. Sometimes you can do it with journaling. Sometimes you can do it with a listening partner. partner. But the key is starting to be curious about our reactions and to really lean into what is triggering me here. Like what is waking up in me that's asking to be healed. And when we can lean into it, and sometimes we need to do some, inner healing work with the younger parts of us. Sometimes it's just having a big cry about the fact that, when you were 4, nobody ever listened to your feelings, and that feels painful. And again, as you mentioned, your parents were doing the best job they knew how. They were doing probably what was done to them. And it isn't about projecting that onto our parents. It's about, okay, that was my story and my imprint, and what can I do with it now? Well, I can love on that little inner 4-year-old in me and go, I'm really sorry you never were listened to, and we're going to work to change that and let you know that it's actually safe to express your feelings now. And then we start to become more comfortable with our children's feelings, and then we're able to hold that space for them, understanding that when our kids are angry or upset, they're just trying to move what's present, and what they need in that moment is a really calm, anchored adult to say, hey, I can hold your storm. I can meet you here. I want to let you know that anger is okay. Projecting anger onto other people is not. Hitting other people is not. But you are allowed to feel angry and allow that to move through your body so you can come back to that beautiful place of calm. And I'm going to create enough safety for you so that you can actually do it.
Mm-hmm. I would actually like, you mentioned one kind of, I guess, form of therapy that I want to kind of hover around, and that is the inner child healing. I remember I still do, I do therapy, once a month for just general maintenance, right? It's like anything else. It's like going to the gym, you go to exercise, you always have to exercise your mind, and sometimes you're going to need it more, sometimes you're going to need it less. And I remember this might have been maybe a couple of years ago. It was a form of hypnosis, and I did some inner child healing. But I want to ask you to unpack that for everyone. What does it mean when you say inner child healing?
So the way that I kind of, and there's lots of different modalities I think that work with this kind of philosophy, and I often, the way I explain it to people I work with is that we all have experiences when we're kids, right? That some are really amazing, some feel incredible, and some where we feel wounded, or where we have trauma, or where we didn't get our needs met, or where we weren't listened to. So we all have these experiences, and those parts of us that can often turn up in times where we have a similar kind of feeling or something going on. So I often talk about that we are conditioned with imprints, right? So we have imprints around everything from, we watch in our family of origin about our parents' relationship to money, and that often is what forms our understanding or relationship with money. We watch our parents right from the very beginning about how they are in intimate relationship with each other. Do they speak kindly? Do they take care of each other? Do they yell? Do they criticize? And we go, oh, okay, that's what relationship looks like. We have imprints around feelings and emotions. As I said, we have imprints around working, you're only successful if you bust your butt and you work 50 hours a week, and that means you're a good person. And we never rest, right? You only sit down if you're sick, and even then you shouldn't, and we watch that and go, okay, yep, so I can never actually rest, or the only way I get a break is to be sick, so I'll be sick all the time. We have all these imprints and stories that we watch in our family of origin, right? And again, some are amazing imprints and also some are not. And what happens is, from those experiences and those imprints we take on, we form belief systems and stories within us around what we believe to be true. And so then we grow up and we become adults, and then we have jobs, and we maybe become a parent, or we move into relationships. And often, a lot of the time, the wounds or the stories that sit within us that haven't been healed will surface in our current day relationships. So that's, you might be working in a job and a colleague likes to make fun of you all the time, right? Now, maybe you grew up in a family where you got mocked all the time when you decided to speak, what you felt about something. And so at work, even though this colleague is just trying to be funny, a massive reaction happens within you, and you're like, oh my God, he's mocking me, and that's not okay. And you get really reactive to it. And maybe you go into a story of like, I'm not good enough, or I can never say how I feel because people won't understand it. Or maybe you start to get really angry, or who knows, right? You have a reaction. And in that sense, in that state, for how I see it, is that there is a younger part of you that's being activated, that's asking to be healed, that's asking to be taken a look at. So if we were to lean back into what's here for me, what's going on, and we can identify this feeling. I know this feeling because it's how I used to feel as a 5-year-old when we'd sit at the dinner table and I would share something and my parents would mock me, or my older brother would mock me, and I would just go into shame, and then I would feel like I'm not good enough. So when we can identify that something's there, and we don't have to identify the story, right? We don't have to know what happens. It's usually just a feeling that we have, or we can just feel, yeah, I'm not feeling like an embodied adult right now. I feel like a little kid. Then when we can lean into that and go, there's something here from the past, what we can do with this beautiful inner child work is to kind of have a conversation with that little 5-year-old within us. And the conversation might go something like this: what are you feeling right now? And the 5-year-old within you might be like, I feel like it's not fair. I feel angry because they're mocking me. I just want them to listen to me. This doesn't feel good. And we want to, I imagine it as like the adult me is having a conversation with the younger child part of me. So if it was me, I'd be like, oh, Lael, little Lael, like, tell me more. What else? What else is there? And you kind of are having a dialogue with yourself around what felt hard. And then what I would often do is I'd often offer the younger parts of me what I really wanted to hear at the time, which was, I am so sorry that you are being mocked in this moment. And I'm so sorry that the people around you aren't able to meet you in your feelings and emotions. And I want you to know that it's safe for you to express how you feel. And I'm here and I'm listening. And is there more that you want to tell me? And we kind of have this dialogue with the younger parts of us. Now, you can do this journaling. You can do it just with your eyes closed. You can do it in therapy. You can do it in hypnosis, all those kind of things. But often what I find is that when we acknowledge the younger parts of us, when we give them that healing and holding, when we go, I see you and I totally understand why you felt the way you feel, then that feeling and that younger part of us starts to melt a little bit, and it's not so at the forefront of our mind, and it's not the part that ends up being reactive as the adult. I often joke we're all wounded children walking around in adult bodies, most of the time bumping into each other, reacting from those wounded child parts, right? A lot of the time, we're actually not our adult selves. A lot of the time, we're these wounded children, bouncing up against each other. So when we can kind of lean into those younger parts, do some work with them, we start to heal that inner child. We start to love and give that inner child what we felt like we couldn't get. And I know that sometimes when adults come to this work, the deep desire is to hear all those things from their parents, to still as a 30 or 40-year-old person to be able to go back to their parents and want to hear their parents say, I love you just the way you are, and you are enough, and you don't have to prove anything. But sometimes our parents aren't capable of that. Sometimes our parents are never going to give us what we deeply desire. And this inner child work is about us parenting ourselves in the way that we need, and knowing that they're enough and loving on them so that they so that we can integrate those younger parts of us so that we actually can operate from the adult part of who we are.
So I have a question more so from a relationship standpoint. If two people come together and they form, a loving, intimate bond, do you think for this relationship to be successful, filled with joy and happiness and ultimately longevity, that both parties need to understand childhood, what their childhood was like, went through their traumas, and ultimately did this, this inner childhood healing that you speak of?
I mean, that would be the gold standard, right? That would be amazing. I mean, I often joke, we think we choose our partners because you're like, oh, you're cute or you're sexy or, but really we actually look at someone and go, oh, your wounds match my wounds, and how wonderful, we can work this out together, right? So we often choose partners who push our buttons because we're coming to heal a lot of our own stuff. I mean, what you explained there would be amazing and perfect, if we had the awareness to be like, all right, well, these are my wounds and these are yours. Let's be super tender and kind with each other around this. But unfortunately, that doesn't often happen. What happens is we just go through life, and then your partner packs the dishwasher the wrong way, or, doesn't listen to you when you say something, and all of a sudden you get fired up and you get angry at them. And then we start, sparring with each other. And it's, again, those younger parts having a relationship with each other. So I think in an ideal world, yes, amazing. We can do the inner work. We can be aware of it. But I don't think that's the reality, because I think, again, most of us have not been brought up with that emotional awareness to be able to tune into themselves. Most of us are reactive. We don't actually pause and are curious and go, I wonder what's here for me. But it doesn't mean to say that we can't have that. Part of a conscious relationship is learning to be able to identify what is here for me. I've been with my husband for nearly 25 years now, and in our early years of relationship and parenting, there was a lot of blame, and there was a lot of you're not doing what I want, and there was a lot of keeping score, and it wasn't great. But as we grew and we began to both do our own inner work, we were able to then identify when something did come up. We could take a pause and go, there's something happening for me here, and it's about this, or I'm feeling really reactive around that because it's accessing this part. And we could actually have conversations and enter into stuff that once upon a time maybe would have been yelling, was actually all about what's happening for you here and what do you need, so that we knew that it actually wasn't about the other person. There was just some deeper stuff surfacing for us within.
I would highlight there, like, awareness, I think, is such a pivotal step in that. And also, just thinking, for myself, and just this can definitely appear to be very overwhelming. Like, we're talking a lot about healing, going back to childhood, and for some people this might be like, well, where do I even begin? Or, I'm an adult, how can I change my whole past before me? But I think it's important to mention is exactly like you mentioned, these belief systems, this programming essentially that happens throughout childhood and adolescence and into adulthood. Just as it was programmed, it can be unprogrammed and rewired. And there's just so much, right? And there's just so much work that can go into that, and so many different ways that you can do that. Does it take work? Well, yes, but I think anything that's worth fighting for takes work, right?
100%. And that, I love that you bring that up. This all can be worked with. It is freeing, because this is where we actually find real power within ourselves. When we understand our stories, when we're able to catch them, when we're able to work with them, when we no longer project it onto everybody else, that is when we become embodied. That is where we become our most powerful selves. And not everybody's going to want to do the work. I mean, most of the world doesn't want to do the work, right? Like, it's pretty clear to see, most of the world kind of lives in a bit of an unconscious state. But if you have even the smallest part of you that's curious and wants to do the work, then the richness of it is amazing. We often don't lean into the stuff because we're terrified about what's going to bring up, or we think it's going to be scary. But actually, the more that we do, the more we uncover, the more free we become in who we are. And that's actually when we do have really embodied relationships and beautiful intimacy, and get to parent in the way we want, or have success in our career and work and stuff. The more we know ourselves, the greater we can actually be. So it is not easy, I've done therapy for many years. Like, it's, I don't believe I could do what I do now unless I'd done my own work. I've had to sit in all the crappy stuff. I've had to, lean into all those things. But, as a parent now, particularly of adult children, the one thing I do not regret is doing my own work, because the more I have done for myself, the less my kids have to do. And that feels like one of the greatest gifts I can give them, is to know my own story and to do my own work has allowed them to be free to be who they need to be in the world. And they've still got stuff, like everyone's got stuff, right? We've all still got crap we've got to work with. But the less that you can put on their shoulders, the better.
Yeah, just when you said freeing, or I think that's just such a beautiful word to succinctly summarize the feeling or emotion that that I went through, at least as I went through my therapy and started figuring out why I am a certain way, why have my previous intimate relationships failed. Often when people have 3 or 4 or 5 failed relationships, you pretty much have one failed relationship, and it just repeats over and over and over again, right? And these are the things that I started to unravel. But as I went on my healing journey, it's just, when you said freeing, it's like, that's the perfect word to describe how I felt and am feeling as I go through this journey of healing. I do want to ask about your school that you co-founded, because I read about it, and I think it's just so interesting. It's so unique, and it's just so needed. So you founded this school in 2021, and it's based on social connectedness, emotional and social well-being, as much as it is learning. And I think there's a school here called Waldorf Academy that might be similar in a sense, similar values, ideologies. Now, if we compare this I guess method of teaching to like the conventional pedagogy, Western schooling system, where it's you learn a lot of subjects and you have to be good at a lot of things, as opposed to like interest-based education, where as an educator or teacher, you kind of find out what the child likes, you nurture this, and as a result, they would be, intrinsically motivated to do that. So I want to ask you, what kind of inspired you to to create such a educational system, and also what can children benefit from going to this type of schooling in comparison to more conventional schooling that we're used to?
Yeah, great questions. Look, it really came about because Mel, my co-creator in the school, wanted somewhere for her children to go that, met them emotionally. And so, she said to me, why don't you build the school that you think should exist? And, for me, I look back on my own journey. I didn't feel like I fit in at schools. And then also, watch my own children struggle in the schooling system, because one was an athlete. So it was very hard for him to sit still and learn at a desk. He needed to move his body. The other one was was highly sensitive. So found being in the classroom, lots of people really full on. The other one, I think, is just a natural disruptor. If there's any systems that are outdated, she's going to call it out. So I watched my kids really struggle in the school system as well, because they were like, why are we doing this? They would say to me often, why am I learning about this? I have no interest. And I'd be like, that's what the curriculum says you should, right? Like, and I would agree with them. I said, yeah. And they're like, why can't I move my body when I want to move my body? And so, look, all the reasons pointed towards what could look different. And I think what we've created at Woodline is we've come back to the whole child, which is, again, coming back to this philosophy. When children feel safe, when they feel seen, when they feel like they belong, then they are more open to learning, and they're more open to that natural curiosity, that inquisitivity, all that kind of beautiful stuff. So we wanted to create spaces which feel really homely and beautiful, so we have couches and lamps and lots of tactile stuff in our spaces. We are a play-based learning school, so really coming back to understanding the philosophy that children actually learn a lot through play, right? When we sit down and say, right, now we're doing maths at a desk and it's this and this, again, for some children that will work beautifully, but the majority won't. They'll be like, oh, I don't get it, and why? And whereas when we can create play, or we can create something that is learning about measurement, using nature, being curious as to the why we're learning this, then a whole lot of other information kicks in, right? So it's really coming back to those philosophies of that when a child is interested in something, you don't have to force them to sit and learn it. They just do it naturally, right? Which I think is all of us. It's for anybody who's interested in something. You'll sit there and you'll just study and read and want to know more. Whereas if you said to me, you need to go and study ancient China, I'd be like, what? It would feel torturous. I'm like, I've got no interest in it. I don't care. Like, it's not my vibe, right? Whereas similar for children. So we really wanted to create a learning environment where learning can be fun, where we absolutely set up environments for children to learn in the way they learn best. Now, for some kids, that's sitting at a desk and writing. That's how they take information in. For other children, they learn best by teaching somebody else. For other children, they learn best by moving, using their hands and creating something. Some learn best by using their bodies. Some use, there's all different ways our children learn. And so at our school, we have small class sizes so that we call our teachers guides, so that our guides are able to know these children well, tune into them, know how they learn best, follow their natural, learning. So, we have to follow a curriculum like most other schools, but how we deliver the curriculum is up to us. So we try and do as much learning outside as possible. So we use nature wherever we can. We really invite from the social emotional parts for children to keep tuning into their bodies. What do you need? So if a child is feeling really frustrated and agitated, we're like, do you need to go climb a tree? Do you need to go see the animals? Do you need to go for a run for a minute? Like inviting children to tune into what do I need for a few minutes to reset so I can come back and do what what I need to do. We talk a lot about feelings and emotions, so they're aware about how they're feeling, so they can express it freely. We welcome tears at our school, which a lot of schools don't. You know, if a child cries, it's like, stop crying, don't be upset. Whereas like tears are a beautiful natural healing mechanism. And if you need a cuddle and a cry, then please let it out, because we know that when you come back into balance, then you're more open to learning again. So, you know, and I think also basic things like choice and autonomy, which we don't often give kids. You know, children often have to ask to go to the toilet or when they can eat. And we're like, you can go to the toilet when you want. And we have, you know, we have food for kids to be able to graze on if they need, because some children don't like to sit and eat. You know, they can take their shoes off. They can, you know, like just basic stuff that we know helps children to feel relaxed and safe. And then we also, you know, have lots of adventures and lots of stuff that is really about, you know, creating curiosity in children. So they go, oh, I could do this, or what about that? And I think that that's, you know, one of the most beautiful, rich things that we see. And I think in the years that we've been open, what we've discovered is not only has our learning increased incredibly, because again, children who often had trouble learning, when they feel safe and when their guide is able to tune into them to know how they learn best, and their learning flourishes, but also their confidence, their ability to express themselves, all that kind of stuff has been amazing. Now, I don't say that our school is for everybody. You know, for some children, they want more structure. For some adults, they want their children to have structure, and this is how we learn. And that is okay. Like I go, there's enough, you know, we it's not for everybody. You know, we really value at our school. It's not about academic success. You know, that is a byproduct of it. But our school is about how do we raise a whole child to feel connected to themselves, connected to the earth, connected to each other, to have that compassion and empathy about who they are, and to understand how they learn best, and to love learning. You know, for me, that's the goals and why we created the school. So, you know, I think there are lots of different schools that kind of probably are similar around the world. Not lots, but schools that are similar around the world that really hold that as
I said I wish there were lots.
yeah. I do wish there were lots too. And, you know, I get asked all the time, can you help me build a school? And it's hard to build a school, but I am working with other different people to help build and create something similar, you know, in wherever they are in the world, to be able to do that. Because I think we do need more of this. You know, I think we need to get kids off tech and back into nature. You know, we are a no tech school, so our kids don't learn on iPads or computers. You know, we have some technology, but it's not used as a learning tool. You know, it really is bringing them back into nature and connection and all that kind of stuff, you know. So it's very, you know, very proud of what we created at our school. And I think, you know, we're still learning and growing. This is our 4th year. It's been, you know, a huge learning curve. And I think from the initial idea and vision, you know, to see it come to life in this way has been amazing. And, you know, I hope it can stand as an example of what is possible for our education systems.
Yeah, it's definitely a beautiful educational model. And, you know, if we just think of the conventional system where we just kind of funnel children into a very streamlined curriculum, and like you mentioned, it's some people are going to thrive and some people aren't. And for those that don't, we kind of put them in boxes, and it's they must have ADHD or they can't focus. Well, perhaps they're just not learning the way they should be learning, right? Because everybody has unique needs, right? And we unfortunately don't address these in the education system as they grow up. So programs and educational systems like like the one that you've co-founded, I think hopefully create, you know, this paradigm shift where, like you said, it's not going to be for everyone, but the main thing is there's an option for people who need it. Whereas right now there isn't, or if there is, it's, you know, few and far between.
Yes, totally. And I think that's it. It's for a long time we've made children wrong for not, you know, exact falling into line in the way that we think. And I actually think we're at a different time in the world where we're actually like, well, is this environment serving children? And a lot of the time it's not, you know. And I think I do sometimes say to educators, not to educators, but to parents, like, if you had to go to school all day like our children do, you'd be outraged by the end of the day. You know, you have to be told, you're being told what to do all the time. You can't move when you want to, all these kind of things. We'd be like, ugh, this doesn't feel good. And then we wonder why our kids come home and, you know, have big feelings or just don't like it, because they're saying this doesn't suit me and my soul of what it needs. And I think that's where we need need to relook at stuff to go, there is another way that we can do it, but it's a big ship to turn, like our system has been set up. When we look at education, it was set up in the industrial age. It was set up to create workers. It was set up to create people who would do what they were told. Right.
Yeah.
And I think, again, where we are in the world, it's not serving its purpose anymore.
Yeah. So I just want to round out our discussion now. And I think a lot of parents perhaps might find this question hopefully useful. Based on your experience and the work that you've done working with parents, children, what do you feel are 3 common parenting pitfalls that you commonly experience, or parents might show you or teach you or seek support from? And then how do they raise how do they raise an emotionally intelligent child?
So I think I probably would say the 3 biggest pain points that I see in parenting is, 1, how do I deal with feelings and emotions, right? So that's usually where parents get most fired up, is when their 5-year-old loses it because you cut their sandwich the wrong way, or the 10-year-old gets really upset because you ask them to take the dog for a walk, and then we just get really reactive around, why can't you just do it? Or instead of actually going, well, there's something might be going on here. So I think the first one for me is that responding to feelings and emotions in a really reactive way usually brings up lots of feelings for parents. I think the second thing that is the most challenging for parents as well is really around getting our kids to cooperate. So when we just want them to brush their teeth, or we want them to do these things and they're not doing it, and then we move into frustration, and then often our default is to power over our kids. So we threat or we yell, all that kind of stuff. And again, I think the invitation is to be curious, to take a pause and go, okay, well, they're not cooperating. What's going on for them here? Are they in balance? No, they're not. They're really wired. They've been at their grandparents all day, and they're really wound up, and they're not listening, and they're like, okay, they need something. Do they need to move their body? Do we need some connection? Do we need to play? Do we need to laugh? Do I need to set a limit so they can have a big meltdown and a cry, so they can move all the stress from their body? Is what is needed in these moments? So I think those pieces are also really, really powerful, to start to be curious around, if my child's not doing what I want, can I look behind the behavior and go, what else is happening here? The third piece, I think, which is, again, one of the biggest pitfalls of parenting, is not owning our stuff, like what we've talked about here, is really moving into power over and control. And I totally get this, because we do it when we feel out of control, or we do it when we've had enough, or we do it because we're tired. And, I think when we pull back from that as a bigger picture, we are all parenting often on our own. When the village no longer exists, right? We're meant to be in the village where we're parenting with others and we've got support, but a lot of the time we're doing it on our own, in our own houses, and it is hard. It is really, really hard. And I think we then give ourselves a hard time when we yell or lose it. And actually, we're all often parenting in environments that are super stressful. And we're also worried about paying the mortgage, and we're worried about putting food on the table. And maybe we've got an elder parent who's sick. There's a lot of stresses these days that we're carrying. And then when our kids just won't get into bed, we yell and we lose it. And I so get that and understand it. And so we've got to have compassion for ourselves, because we're all doing the best job we know how. But sometimes it's those tipping points where we go, this does not feel good and it's not working. How could this be different? Now, sometimes that's about support, getting some extra support so we can have a break. Sometimes it's about self-care. Sometimes it's about taking care of our bodies. Sometimes it's about doing some of the inner work we've talked about to be able to acknowledge our reactions and responses, so that we can, we can respond in ways that are more conscious and aware. So it's not easy. Like, I have so much compassion for parents. In my early years of parenting, like, my oldest is 23 now, but in my early years of parenting, I yelled. I was everything that I talk about. I'm like, that's me. I was very permissive as a parent. I just wanted my kids to be happy all the time. So I never really set boundaries. It did not feel good. And my husband and I, we fought, and it was not great. And it really wasn't until I started to do this inner work that I went, oh, there's a whole lot of stuff here I have to sort out. And the more I did that, the calmer I became as a parent. And then I stopped yelling, and then I was able to be with my kids with their feelings and emotions, and And, that's what's really changed it. So, to finish off with your last question, how do we raise emotionally intelligent children? I'm like, you got to do your own work. You got to do your own work. You got to get comfortable with feelings and emotions. We've got to move out of punishments and rewards and shaming children into compassion and compassionate boundaries, and really looking through some of the core stuff that we have to identify with is our relationship to boundaries and self-care and feelings and emotions and all the stuff that we've kind of talked about today. The more that we can lean into that and look at it and understand ourselves, and then come back to how do I want this to look in my family, then we're on the right path to helping to raise these beautiful, emotional, aware children.
Mm. Beautifully summarized, and I think that's a great way to kind of end this discussion. Lael, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. It was very insightful. I learned so much in such a short amount of time, so I'm truly grateful to connecting with you. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to have this discussion.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, George.